Welcome back, guys. It's been a minute. This is the Big Sky Podcast Network Power Rankings, where we don't really give a shit about power rankings at all. I'm your host, Brian Marceau. Like I said, it's been a couple weeks. Had full disclosure, my nursing school and work schedule was just kind of out of control. So, finally got to make it back. Patty Frakes in the comment section, Max Antouche in the comment section. Good to finally be back, guys. We're having the live viewers start to kind of creep up. Like, I kind of miss doing the Sunday show. It gets to be non-Idaho centric. Full disclosure, it's how I make myself actually educated on the Big Sky too. And yeah, man. Well, look, we're gonna get started. I don't give a shit about power rankings. There's like three guaranteed playoff teams, then some other guys we got to discuss. So who in God's name cares about ranking teams 1 through 12 at this point? So, look, before I talk about the 3 playoff teams, I just need to acknowledge Halloween weekend was out of control in the Big Sky. In the hashtag OnlyTubs Discord, patreon.com/Tubs of the Club to support the show. It was discussed, hey, like maybe the home teams just sucked because you know what? They got to go have fun on Halloween. The visitors had to be locked in hotels. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm not saying that's like 0% impact maybe, because look, the 3 games we gotta talk about that were just insane is Portland State picks up a win, hey, Idaho over NAU, not insane, but kind of a wild flow to that game, and then Idaho State beating UC Davis. I think there's a little bit we can uncover with all 3 of those games that might make the game seem less wild, but again, like on paper, it was an intense week, man. Like 3 completely brain dead. Yeah, we knew this was going to happen results. And 3, like, holy shit, that just happened, didn't it? Before we get to those, though, this is Around the Bar. This is brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. Now, of course, if this is a Tubs of the Club endeavor, which means it's presented by Snake River Stampede Canadian Whisky. But for the sake of Around the Bar, that's the proprietary area of Hughes River. And yes, I am struggling to find, there we go. Found the link. All right, we're golden. So if you are looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, do not look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal-owned and operated since 1976 and are ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River No Return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway, and check out special trips like the one to see the Perseid Meteor Shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. You just bring your clothes, let HRE handle the rest. So grab your paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 406-540-4450. Check them out at hughesriver.com. Okay, so what was wild? Let's talk about things that were kind of crazy this last week. So phase 1, I have tried so hard to not be flippant about teams this year, but Portland State just makes it impossible. Like Bruce Barnum looks like he's trying to get fired. But then this week, good Lord, Cal Poly, who for a lot of the season, no one thought they were good, right? No one thought the Mustangs were like playoff worthy or something like that. But for a lot of the season, Cal Poly had looked like they were that dreaded F word, frisky. And I don't think we can call them that anymore, because I promised I wasn't going to talk about Portland State, but the Vikings, I just watched them in Moscow. They crossed the 50-yard line maybe a few times. Portland State cannot pass. They cannot run. They cannot defend the pass. They cannot defend the run. Somehow they scored 40 at Cal Poly. I have no idea. No one. If you made money betting Portland State to score 40, check yourself into rehab this second, because the only explanation for that is degeneracy. So the Vikings beat Cal Poly 40-35 in a game that Portland State, at halftime, the Vikings were up 24-14, which on the season, you guys know how many times Portland State even scored 24 heading into this game? If you've listened to the show at all and paid attention, you might be thinking, oh, the answer is 0. No, the answer is twice. They scored 27 against Eastern and 27 against Weber. But 24 just at the half, if you stop it there, that's their 3rd best offensive outing of the entire season. But look, again, the Vikings score 40. They did They led 40-28 with 13 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Cal Poly did not score until 55 seconds left, so it might look like Portland State tried to lose, but they didn't. And yeah, your Vikings are 1-8, 1-4 Big Sky. Cal Poly 3-6, 1-4 in Big Sky, and I just think we got to file Cal Poly as, man, they suck. I don't care how they've been tight in some other games. Their one Big Sky win came against Sac State when Sac State threw 1,000 picks. And other than that, I mean, they did have a rough run of Davis, Montana State, but no, Portland State is lost now. No, we're done on this show talking about Cal Poly. I was hoping I'd be able to say, well, the Mustangs must have had like 6,000 turnovers. They did have 3, but Portland State had 2. So like it wasn't Cal Poly shooting themselves in the foot turnover wise. It was they gave up 502 yards to Portland State. That is the end. So I'm officially done talking about Portland State for the season. Max Antouche saying, I don't know if the outcome shocked me nearly as much as the score. How could the outcome not have shocked you? Portland State's terrible to everything. Cal Poly had at least picked up a couple wins. That was evidence that things could be okay for at least a minute. So that's kind of my takeaway here is, yeah, Cal Poly, you're done. You're not frisky. We're officially done. Camus Chris saying, can we just get on to the next game? That's probably not the worst idea, but still, it was wild. Portland State picked up a win. Who knew that could happen? Okay, the next wild game, Chris. Idaho at Northern Arizona on actual Halloween. Idaho pulls away in overtime, 35-32. Rhythm of this game was wild because, look, hey, NAU scores first. Idaho reels off 26 consecutive points. Then NAU reels off 22 consecutive points. It goes to OT. And Idaho ends up with the win. And Ross Warren comment section saying the Cal Poly top 5 Portland State game made even less sense than the UC Davis ISU game. Well, like some parts of UC Davis ISU make sense if you know the reporting, but there's really shitty reporting out of a lot of Big Sky schools. So some of it there's no reason to know unless you're paying super close attention. So back to the Idaho game. Now, this was pretty big for NAU. We're going to talk playoff implications a little bit further, but your Lumberjacks thought they're going to be sitting pretty at 6-3, playing a sub 500 Idaho team at home off of just a win. The Lumberjacks beat Idaho State the week before. Now, the rest of their schedule is pretty goddamn helpful for making the playoffs. We'll get there in a second, but what we saw out of Idaho was pretty wild. So Northern Arizona has been really shitty defending in general, but in particular, they've been really rough against the pass. They do get to the quarterback okay, but their secondary is terrible. In this game, Joshua Wood, quarterback for Idaho, real strong in the first half of the game. And then second half, things just went to hell, man. The guy was 3 of 13 for a while. The question on the Idaho end is Elisha Cummings, starting running back. Dude was electric through this game. 12 carries for 106 yards and a touchdown, 5 catches for 78 yards and a touchdown. But he just didn't get the ball much in the second half. So it was just a really weird play calling sequence for Idaho. If you're a Vandal fan like I am, you kept wondering, like, okay, how this guy like Cummings is completely shredding NAU. Like, why can't we give the dude the ball? And anyway, that was the confusing end on the Idaho end, like offensively. On the NAU end, they had their own coaching stuff that was super confusing too. Because like you look at Ty Pennington, he goes 23-34 for 267 yards, 1 touchdown. Now the NAU line sucks. Just FYI, if you guys haven't watched NAU, their offensive line sucks because Idaho's pass rush has been pretty bad this year, and they had no trouble for a lot of that game getting to Pennington. But those 11 incomplete passes Pennington threw, at least 4 were wide open, off the hands drops. Would have been big plays. Now I say it was surprising that the NAU play calling here, because Idaho's secondary is not good. Pennington shredded them quite a bit, and even when he missed, most of them were a good percentage of them were receivers dropping passes. But Brian Wright, NAU head coach, really wanted to run the ball. Ran it 36 times compared to 34 passes. I mean, you might subtract a few of those because Pennington did get sacked a few times, so maybe it's closer to 50-50. But I thought that was indefensible. Seth Cromwell had a good game, 18 carries for 116 yards, but a lot of that came on a few chunk plays. Otherwise, was not that great rushing the ball. You look at NAU on the game, they also had a big Big run by receiver Kobe Katzis for 28 yards, touchdown there. But that minus a few chunk plays, NAU was not actually that effective at running the ball. But still, Brian Wright went to that well. I don't know why, because just like I said, the Idaho end. If Cummings is beating the shit out of teams, get him the ball and quit throwing fades for Joshua Wood, for the love of God. But the Idaho wideout quarterback situation was odd. We covered it in our Tubbs Club post game. The second half, Wood missed some shots he typically makes, but also the Idaho receivers saw the NAU drops and said, "Hey, we can raise you." And Idaho had some huge drops in the second half too. But long story short, some kind of perplexing coaching stuff on both ends. Both veteran Brian Wright, he's made the playoffs. Thomas Ford's in his first year as well. But Idaho came away with the W. The Vandals, for a lot of that game, looked much more like the team I think most of us in the Big Sky, not just Vandal fans, but most of us thought Idaho would be looking like for most of this year. The win for Idaho, huge, pushes the Vandals to 4-5 on the season, 2-3 in Big Sky play, with 2 of their 3 Big Sky losses coming without their starting quarterback. So Idaho's season's starting to look a little more promising. I wouldn't say anything about playoffs until the Vandals pick up at least a win at home against UC Davis this week. I'm just saying that because Davis is going to be favored. They should be. But for the Vandal world, don't worry about the playoffs until then. But Idaho does look like they are clearly trending upward. Some of the improvements we saw in that Portland State win did persist into this week. That's a big deal. Now the NAU end is, look, I think if you pay attention to the Big Sky, you've known NAU is not great this year. They're okay. And okay teams are going to win some games they shouldn't. They're going to drop some games they shouldn't. NAU probably feels like they should not have dropped this game. I'm going to tell you, talent-wise, I didn't see an ocean of difference between NAU and Idaho. I saw that NAU's, they've been a little more stable this season. That's probably it. And there's some scheduling god stuff that favored NAU as well. They only have one FBS game they've played. But third kind of perplexing game, and I say perplexing because just on paper, it's wild to think that Idaho State, heading into this week, though a lot of people, myself included, are a little bit higher on Idaho State than maybe the record should have been. Before this week, the Bengals had one total FCS win. Well, now they have 2. They go into Davis, pick up a back and forth 38-36 win off the leg, a game-winning field goal off the leg of our man. I'll look up his name in a second. I don't have all the Big Sky kickers' names memorized, but it was Trajan Sinatra. 50 time expires to pick up W for Idaho State. And this was an absolutely this was a back and forth affair. Now, to be fair, Idaho State led for most of this game, but UC Davis, they got up 21-20 before in the second quarter, 12 minutes left, which then Idaho State reclaimed the lead right again. Then UC Davis reclaimed the lead right again. So we probably had about 5 or 6 lead changes throughout this game. Truly wild how that went. Now, here's what I'm going to say. Why is this not shocking? Now, one, it is shocking, of course. No shit, it is shocking. Now, the part I'm going to say is less shocking. You had to listen to the broadcast to kind of be clear on this. Davis has about 13-ish starters injured. They have some pretty key ones too. Like, hey, both Rex and Porter Connors gone for the season. Caden Pinnock's back. He was hospitalized with an illness a couple weeks ago. It's part of why he's gone. So he just assumed Caden Pinnock's going to be back. But key injuries and lots of injuries for UC Davis. They also lost, I believe, I got on the broadcast. I was trying to look up reporting. And again, the reporting at Davis sucks. I believe it was Carter Vargas, who had been one of the leading rushers for Davis through this game. He went out partway through. Jordan Fisher finished with 22 carries for 108 yards for Davis. And then Pinnock, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. That was one of the shocking parts for Davis, was just the fact that Caden Pinnock and one of his picks was late, and that was a big deal. And Idaho State being able to pick up that W. So the Idaho State thing I'm going to point you to is, you guys, you might not notice, and if you're not paying really close attention to the Big Sky, I guarantee this is something you're not aware of. The number 2 running back in the Big Sky play is Dason Brooks, running back for Idaho State. averaging 110 yards per game on 6.9 yards per carry. So no, Brooks has been good the entire season. I know like the brain dead understanding right off the top of your head is going to be like, oh, Idaho State passes 1,000 times. And like, yeah, they do and they don't. It's not, you have to actually pay attention to teams, see what they're doing. Do they pass more than they rush? Yes, but it's not remotely close to what it had been the previous 2 years. Deshaun Brooks is going to be an all Big Sky performer, assuming he doesn't get hurt throughout the rest of this year. And he is clearly one of the best backs in the Big Sky. And that's part of why Idaho State can at times score the way they do. They also have got the one of the top receivers in Zion Nunnally. In this game, hey, he had 9 catches for 119 yards and a touchdown. But what I'm going to look at is Idaho State's up and down. And, like we got in the comment section, give me 1 second to find that out. Was that Davis came out super flat. There's Ross Warren. Lots of injuries for Davis, but good Lord, they came out flat and stayed flat. No energy even after getting their starting quarterback back. But again, like this was just a weird week. A lot of teams probably feel like they came out flat. UC Davis is a top 10 team. They should not be losing to a team like Idaho State. However, the Bengals played University of Montana very close in Pocatello. But Idaho State's an up and down team. When things are clicking, they can hang with a lot of the Big Sky. But when things are not clicking, they can get their asses kicked. They're a very hot, cold team. Some of this is matchup dependent. Some of this is if Jordan Cook is not, having turnovers. But the big, losing streak that Idaho State was on earlier this year, they've had 2 separate 3-game losing streaks. Their Big Sky one was Montana State, NAU. Well, at the time, NAU is looking like a playoff team. NAU still may be a playoff team. So those are 3 not bad losses at all. And then, with the fact they had Davis here, think of that murderous row of Montana State, NAU, Davis. Now, to close season, Idaho State's got Cal Poly, Weber, and then, that last week against Idaho, both teams are starting to make that game look like it's going to be interesting, that there will be a game. Look, obviously, last game of the season, everyone's paying attention to Cat Grizz, but that Idaho State game, that's looking like something that's going to be worth paying attention to close the season. Now, got to talk about our other 3 playoff teams. Well, got to talk about the playoff discussion in a second. But before I get to that, I just want to slam through. Montana State beat the shit out of Northern Colorado, 55-7. This was a game that was result was not in doubt almost instantly. Justin Lamson, 16 for 22, 331 yards, 3 touchdowns, and Adam Jones, like no one on the ground rushed for more than 100 yards for Montana State because they didn't need to. They got to spread the rock and had no trouble whatsoever, still rushing for 189 yards on 38 attempts, got 3 touchdowns there. But that's, they have more than 500 yards of offense. And that's just I just want to point to this as being Montana State's a pretty damn diverse team offensively. They can beat you through the air. They can beat you on the ground. Justin Lamson has to be a candidate for Big Sky Player of the Year. He doesn't lead the league in passing yards per game. That's our man Caden Pinnock in Big Sky play. But for the reps that Lamson gets, he is damn efficient. 78 of 112 on the Big Sky season, 13 passing touchdowns, 0 picks, 69.6% of his passes he completes. That's very hard to do much better than that, although Caden Pinnock is in most other categories. Then the Grizz, the Grizz travel to Weber State. Weber State is terrible. Montana rolls 38-17, another game that was not really close whatsoever. In Montana Weber, the guy, one of the guys who is really kind of shining out this year, or who has been making a much more of an impact this year than you thought he might have, just based off his Eastern touches, Michael Wortham. He actually wasn't the guy who blew things up in the Weber State game. Wortham receiving had 2 catches for 8 yards. Rushing, he had 3 rushes for 14 yards. So what happened? Well, one, Blake Bohannon had 3 catches for 131 yards and a touchdown. Then Eli Gilman gets 122 yards on 12 carries and a touchdown. And then Keely Ayat, 15 to 27, 296 yards and 2 touchdowns. So it was a pretty balanced effort overall. By the way, Ayat rushed for a touchdown as well. Your basic thing here is Weber State is terrible. Their quarterback situation is the worst situation in the conference, probably outside of Portland State. And yeah, like I don't know what else to say. I'm not trying to be funny. Like Weber State sucks. So that's the takeaway for Weber State. Takeaway Montana State is both those two. Hey, brain dead. They're looking like those two should be cruising into the last week of the season, playing for Big Sky Conference Championship. We'll get to playoff talk in a second. Before that, just got to remind you guys about checking out vandalgear.com. Look, vandalgear.com really stepped up to the plate this year in making new Vandal gear. They made their name right away with the Fighting Taters shirt and sweatshirt, but they've just been coming out with design after design afterward. You can see it on the screen if you're watching live, like the Grumpy Joe Kibby Dome yellow t-shirt with a gray and white shoulder stripe, but on shirts across the chest. You got a couple different Kibby Dome logos as well. You also have Idaho and script. Look, they just completely stepped up to the plate. Their shirts are fantastic. They're high quality and they're really affordable in the world of ordering shirts. You're looking at, county shipping somewhere between but they're about $25 each. And they are high quality shirts. Company specific custom sportswear. So look, if you like what they're doing, first off, order some from vandalgear.com. But if you're a business, you're an org, you're a school, you want to do a fundraiser, you just want to have merch, or you want to have gear for your employees to wear, get a hold of Jeff. He can work with your own logo. He can help you design a logo. And if you can print it, he can do it. So company name is Pacific Custom Sportswear. They've been out of Spokane the last 25 years. The website is vandalgear.com. All right, playoff talk, guys. So, and Camus Chris, love them. Spent almost a paycheck. Camus Chris, I'm still not sure if I want to forgive you for getting on me about going over Portland State, picking up a win. I'm both happy that I had someone prompt me to get off it, but at the same time, I mean, come on, like anyone thought Portland State was going to be anyone this entire year. So we're done with this. Playoff talk. I forgot to talk about Eastern Washington getting their ass kicked by Sacramento State. So, hey, Sacramento State beats the shit out of Eastern Washington. That actually will lead into our playoff talk. What was wild about this game? Sacramento State threw it 6 times. That's it. 6 total times. And Eastern had no answer for the Hornets on the ground. In particular, Rodney Hammond Jr., 22 rushes for 208 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Jaquil Smith, 12 rushes for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. Eastern's down to their third string quarterback now because Nate Bell got hurt. And Eastern sits at 4-5, 3-2 in Big Sky play. It is a fraudulent 3-2. They are going to absolutely faceplant with later in the season. I mean, let's go over the Eastern schedule as my points of evidence. The reason I say that fraudulent is they picked up wins over Portland State, Idaho with a backup quarterback while the Vandals were reeling, and beat a really shitty Weber State by 3. They're going to get their asses kicked at Montana this week. I think Northern Colorado is going to beat Eastern, and then Cal Poly is God knows what's happening to close that season. So look, it looks like honestly, it looks like 4-4 is probably not on. No, 4-4 is on the table for Eastern because they have 3 wins in Big Sky play and they have Cal Poly to close the season. But if you were talking yourself into Eastern looking frisky for playoffs, just don't. They're not going to. There's no prayer. Okay, so right now we have 3 brain dead playoff teams in the Big Sky. And hey, Patty Frick saying Sac State got 90% of their yardage on 4 plays. Super frustrating. Patty, I believe you. I think Sacramento State is not. They are terrified of passing the ball, and Eastern doesn't have that strong secondary in the first place. So the fact that Sac State was unwilling to really even test them tells you all you need to know about what Sacramento State's confidence in their quarterback play. So the playoff talk. We know 3 teams are essentially going to be shoo-ins for the playoffs. So you have the Grizz right now sit at 9-0, undefeated. They're 5-0 in Big Sky play. They close the season with Eastern this week, then Portland State, which is listed as TBD, and then Montana State last week of the season. It would be an incredible letdown for the Grizz to not be undefeated heading into that. They're playing for seeding. Now, I believe everyone's playing for second place in the nation. North Dakota State looks way better than everyone else. They're going to be a 1 seed. But the Grizz could, if they win out, they're going to be as high as a 2 seed. Now, our Bobcats, other team that for sure they're going to make the playoffs, they do have 2 losses to Oregon and South Dakota State earlier in the year. but they're undefeated in Big Sky play. Their run is a little bit rougher than Montana's to close the year. They're going to kill Weber State this week. Then they've got Davis on the 15th and then Montana to close the season. So the Bobcats had a kind of bookended season. First 2 games, they got Oregon, then South Dakota State. Last 2 games, they got Davis and Montana. If the Bobcats win out, they should be the 2 seed as well. I don't care if they lost 1 game to South Dakota State earlier this year. If they beat UC Davis and Montana to close the season, it's hard to do better than that. Now, if Montana State drops 1 to Montana, you're probably talking a 3, maybe 4 seed at worst. If they drop 1 to Davis, they're going to drop out of that top 5. I think that's inconceivable because I think, honestly, if I were to rank the top 3 Big Sky teams right now, I honestly think Montana State would be number 1. I hate the Bobcats, full disclosure. They're my least favorite team in the Big Sky, but if you can't figure out that the Bobcats are pretty goddamn good, then I don't know what you're watching. My big point of evidence about what I think separates Montana State from a lot of the Big Sky, they're electric offensively, averaging 45.6 in Big Sky play, but they've given up 6 touchdowns in 5 Big Sky games. They've given up 3 field goals in those 5 Big Sky games. No one is doing anything whatsoever against Montana State when you're playing the Bobcats. The Bobcats, and it's not just they've played, obviously they've played some of the bottom half of the Big Sky, but some teams that can put up some points. NAU, they scored 10 against Montana State. Idaho State, who just picked up a win scoring, I think, 38 over UC Davis. They put up 14 against the Bobcats. This week, they allowed 7 to Northern Colorado. Teams are just not moving the ball at all against Montana State. Now, Patty Frick's saying Montana looks pretty damn good, man. I think they do too. I think this is a very narrow number 1 team, number 2 team in the Big Sky. But because of how good Montana State has been defensively and the fact that Justin Lamson is playing nearly mistake-free football, that's a pretty tough 1-2 punch. Never mind, we already know that the Bobcats can run. Now, I agree, Patty. Montana looks really good too. And they can beat you in a lot of ways, and they've become more willing to beat you in a lot of ways this season than they had been the last few years, which had been frustrating for Grizz fans. But look, your OC turns a page when he turns a page. Looks like Brent Peace has this season, and Ayat looks way better this year. He's grown a ton. So now you have 2 of the best Big Sky quarterbacks in Montana State, and Lamson and Ayat. And then, I mean, I think some of the skill position players at Montana are stronger, but it's more like the Bobcat defense. I think that they look really, really good right now. So then our number 3 team, playoff wise, you'd have to pencil in as being in the playoffs is UC Davis. Now things just got a little more interesting for Davis. Now, the injuries matter, and injuries to all Big Sky level players, like they're out both Connors brothers for the season. Yeah, that kind of matters. So Davis sits at 6-2 on the season. They're going to finish with 11 total games. So they are handicapped as far as playoff rankings by having 1 fewer potential win on their schedule. But they close the year kind of tough compared to the Grizz and the Bobcats, where they're at Idaho this week, at Montana State, then they host Sacramento State. The Idaho game feels interesting because Idaho is now trending up a ton, and Davis is, they just lost at home to Idaho State. Not that Idaho State's bad by any means, but injuries might be catching up to Davis. So if you're a Davis fan, what you're saying is, Pinnock doesn't throw 2 picks against most teams. By the way, Idaho's secondary is not very good. So good luck having Pinnock make those mistakes on the season. On the Big Sky season, he's completing better than 70% of his passes. But still, now, like, you lose a home game to a team like Idaho State, a solid Big Sky team is Idaho State, not a great Big Sky team. There's a chink in the armor. I think there's a pretty big gap between Montana State, and then UC Davis at 3. So question is, do we got more than 3 teams that are going to make the playoffs out of the Big Sky? And you know what? We're going to talk about the teams who are still in contention in any meaningful way in a second after we talk about show sponsor, Snake River Stampede Canadian Whisky, the best Canadian whiskey available in the state of Idaho, and the second best Canadian whiskey available in the state of Idaho, because you got one, I'd probably say Snake River says the best one would be the small batch 1915. That's number one. And then the number two in the state would be the Stampede. I go back and forth, truly, over which one I like the most. That Oloroso sherry finish on the Stampede. I think it adds a little bit of this, like what I think of as like a candied sweetness to the finish. Now the Stampede 1915, it's aged an extra 2 years. So you got a little bit more depth of flavor just based off that extra aging. Plus it has a different double barrel finish. It's finished in ex-Canadian rye whiskey casks. Both these whiskeys start in ex-bourbon. You can't go wrong with either of these bottles. They're fantastic whiskeys and they're really affordable, man. The whiskey market, if you pay attention, whiskey market looks a lot like the housing market. The Stampede sits at $26, the 1915 at $39. Those are really great value buys, but the whiskey itself, it's not a value whiskey. It's just good. Grab yourself a Snake River. So the other playoff teams, and hey, Camus Chris 4196. I may have had a shot or 12. Yeah, that makes a few of us. Okay, so realistically, the teams in the Big Sky that are still in the playoff hunt. I know I just covered Eastern has 3 wins. They're not in the playoff hunt. They're not gonna. That's a fraudulent Eastern team. There's no prayer that Eastern is gonna pull off the type of wins to get them in the playoff run. Idaho, it 100% depends on what happens this week. You should not gamble on Idaho being a team that wins out. But if Idaho pulls the upset against Davis, then they have a marquee win. And if they win out, they've played themselves onto the fringe. Now, again, they have to actually win against Davis. In all likelihood, I don't think Davis is probably going to win this weekend just based off the matchup with Idaho. Although I think it's going to be interesting with how it's going to be competitive at the very least with how Idaho is trending upward. And there's some clear chinks in the Davis armor defensively. You watch that Idaho State game. But the Vandals, until they pick up that Davis win, you got to say they're outside looking in. So I'm not going to roll the Vandals into this playoff discussion either. I really think just based off how the season has gone, based off how we have 3 weeks left of the season, guys. We have a pretty good idea who most of these teams are. So, the teams who in theory have a chance of making the playoffs, I just wrote out Eastern Washington. I just wrote out Idaho. You have to write out Idaho State because even though they're 3-6, their ceiling is finishing 6-6, but one of their wins is sub D1. So they're out of the picture. And yeah, Northern Colorado out. And we're not going to talk about Weber, PSU, or Cal Poly because they all suck. So that leaves us with Sac State and NAU as our theoretical teams who can make it in with, if something really weird happens, you could say Idaho or Eastern. I'd say it'd be less weird for Idaho to play their way in. It really matters about this week. And until they pick up the win this week, I don't think that the playoff discussion is worth having for the Vandals. But I guess say they're kind of on the outside looking in. They can play themselves into playoff contention. The other 2 teams that we're looking at are Sacramento State and Northern Arizona. Now, both these teams sit at 5-4. Both these teams have 5 FCS wins. Both these teams have 1 FBS loss. The Hornets sit at 3-2 in Big Sky play. The Lumberjacks sit at 2-3 in Big Sky play. Both of these teams have, in theory, the ability to lose 1 more game and make the playoffs. But when we start talking through the resume of each team, Sacramento State, I don't think, unless Idaho turns it, well, I mean, they play Idaho later in second to last week of the season. So if Idaho picks up the Davis win, then, you can talk about that as being a good win. But until that happens, there is no good win on the Sacramento State resume. No win over anyone over 500. But then look at Northern Arizona and, their best win right now, it's going to be between Southern Utah and Incarnate Word. Southern Utah sits at 4-5 on the season. If they finish above 500, that could be, a good win. Incarnate Word right now sits at 3-6. That's definitely not a quality win. So no real quality wins yet. NAU needs some help there. They have an easier close of the season with Northern Colorado, Cal Poly, and Weber. I'm going to say that NAU absolutely has to win out. That's a very favorable close of the season schedule to go, to finish 8-4 on the year, and then say, your losses are to Arizona State, getting killed by Montana State, getting killed by UC Davis, and then Idaho is not a bad team. So I guess, on paper, that's NAU has the easier route because they play essentially no one to close the year, and Sacramento State has Idaho and UC Davis left. Now, if Sacramento State wins out, then you'd say that they have clearly superior resume, and if both those teams are sitting 8-4, they have a good chance at getting into the playoffs. It's just one of these weird things. Hey, Ross, in the comment section, so two things. Sac with a silent K. NAU and Vandals are realistic to be the fourth team, but if I'm betting there is no fourth team, I get less impressed by NAU each week. So here's my pushback to no fourth team. NAU has a very easy route to 8-4. If the Lumberjacks sit at 8-4, I have no idea how they don't make the playoffs just being out of the Big Sky. But then I wouldn't be shocked if they're most certainly not skipping the first round and maybe not even hosting a game based off of how the resume looks. Sacramento State, I don't think they're going to win out, guys. I think 2 losses is completely on the table for the Hornets. They're at least going to pick up 1 loss. It's kind of inconceivable for Davis to completely play themselves out of the playoff picture. So no, but I'm with Ross on NAU looks a little bit less impressive each week. Like they just look solid. I mean, Idaho's a team that I'm a Vandal, so I cover this team a little more closely than most people, of course. Idaho's working through some kinks, first year coach, ton of turnover on the roster that Vandals had a little bit too much faith that they're going to capitalize 90% on turning over a ton of good guys who left to go to New Mexico or P4 schools. But Idaho looks like they're getting it they look like they're getting it together. To be at least a playoff spoiler maybe. But the reason I say this about NAU is they're going to be 8-4, guys. Like they look unimpressive, but NAU is also going to say, man, if we catch a couple of those passes, that's not a loss against the Vandals. Everyone always in close games always has a coulda, woulda, shoulda moment you can look at. But I think NAU has making the playoffs and losing in the first round written all over them. But it's going to be hard for them to not finish 8-4. The Lumberjacks would have to completely implode at this point to not get to 8-4. And so long as Pennington's healthy, they're going to have one of the better quarterbacks. Now, I will say again, I don't understand why they're not more aggressive with Pennington, because he is clearly a better quarterback than NAU is on the ground. Nothing against South Cromwell. He's a solid guy, but that's the ace up your sleeve. I don't know. I don't get not being a little bit more aggressive, especially against some of the teams who have weaker secondary. Now that Northern Colorado matchup would be interesting in the sense that Northern Colorado has played pretty good pass defense against a lot of teams, but they suck on the ground. But NAU looks like they want to run a little bit more. So whatever with that matchup. But I guess I would not say that the Big Sky is going to be a 3 playoff team conference. I think they're likely to be a 4. If the Big Sky is a 5, I don't think it's Sac State who's going to be the 5th team. If Idaho's a 5-team playoff conference, it's because Idaho wins out and NAU wins out. And, Davis picks up just a loss to the Vandals and grabs another 2 wins that put Davis at 8-4 to close the season. Well, actually, no, that's not. If Davis loses to Idaho, they're most certainly going to lose to Montana State. So that would put them at 7-4. I bet that still gets them in the playoffs. But in all likelihood, if the Big Sky is going to get 5 teams in, which I don't think they will, that's not what we should gamble. I think the 5th team will be Idaho. But if that happens, that means Davis is going to drop out a skip in the first round for sure. If Davis finishes the year at 8-3 with, they lose to Montana State, but beat Idaho, Sac State in the other games, they're probably, they're at least in the discussion for an 8 seed for sure. But with two more losses, no, they're completely dropping out of that. So I guess that's the way I would put this simply for Big Sky in the playoff. The Big Sky is going to be a 14 play, going to get 4 bids unless NAU completely implodes. But I think NAU is pretty much just holding steady from last year, where they're like the caliber of just sneaking in the playoffs. Their Super Bowl will be if they can win a first round playoff game. I don't think you should bet on Sac State make playoffs at all. I think Idaho, you're going to learn everything this week. I believe the Vandals are most certainly trending upward and some things are getting better. But there is no world in which Idaho makes the playoffs if they do not win out. And beating UC Davis with Davis off a loss, injuries are going to help the Vandals, but also coming off a loss, you got to expect the prep work is going to be a little bit different, or maybe the effort's going to be a little bit more on point for the Aggies. We know Tim Plow can coach, so I guess that's not in question. The question is whether again, losing both Connors brothers is huge for what UC Davis can do defensively. But that matchup in Moscow, like, hey, Samuel Gutu Jr., he's not hurt, the top receiver for Davis. And Kane Pinnock is back. Like, sickness is part of why he was gone. So that's going to be Idaho's essentially going to need like their best pass defense of the year and their best pass rush of the year to pick up a W over Davis. They're also going to have to score some points. Like the Vandals the game is, if Idaho is going to pick up an upset against Davis, it's going to have to look like this Idaho State game where it's, 38-35, something like that, where both teams are putting up points. And the issue is Davis can't stop teams, but the Aggies are going to score. So, okay. Thanks guys for joining us. I'll be back here as often as I can to close out the season. Just 3 weeks, man. Just crazy how football season goes so goddamn fast. Ross Warren saying, looking back, that UC no contest against Mercer really might screw them out of a solid seed. Well, Ross, here's my pushback. If you remember that game, Davis was going to lose that game. So I think Davis got bailed out because they don't have an additional loss on their schedule. Because, Davis was dominating the first half of that game and then fell apart. I guess, hey, I'll stop closing for a second. There's a reason why I say Davis I think there's an ocean between Davis and Montana State and Montana. Davis, they have a good season, not putting them down whatsoever. UC Davis is a good football team. They have some games that are closer than you would expect. They got a 7-point win over Utah Tech. They got a 7-point win out of Cal Poly, who just lost to Portland State. They did murder NAU, but then they just had a 2-point loss to Idaho State. So I guess what you'd say is, of the top three teams, UC Davis's floor is easily the lowest, and they're going to let teams score some points. Like the Aggies absolutely have the ability to let other teams keep themselves in the game. You're scoring defense. I know in Big Sky play, Davis sits as the number 2 scoring defense in the Big Sky. But what I'm going to point you to with Davis here is, part of that is, part of it's because, 12 points against against Weber State helps a ton. And then holding Northern Colorado to 16, but Davis didn't blow out Northern Colorado. And again, like I already told you, Davis didn't blow out Cal Poly. Your Aggies can they can hang some points on people, but like I'm repeating myself now, but they can let people score too. So for me, that game of the week, let me just talk about the week coming in the Big Sky. The game I am paying the most attention to is most certainly going to be the Idaho Davis game, because I host the Idaho show, right? Well, look, as far as what's at stake, Eastern at Montana's just going to shut the door on Eastern's playoff hopes. Montana State, Weber State, nothing to watch there. Sacramento State, Portland State, nothing really to watch there. Sacramento State's going to win that easy. Cal Poly, Idaho State. I guess the question is going to be, it's in Pocatello. Can Idaho State kind of salvage a couple more wins, get closer to that 500 mark? Northern Colorado, Northern Arizona, talked about the implication there of NAU needs to win, and just the UNC has been able to keep it close with some teams. We'll see. They did have Peter Castelli back for the second half of this game, which was a surprise because he was injured week 1. But no, to me, like the game that means the most is is Idaho at Davis, because if Idaho loses, that their playoff hopes are done. But if Idaho wins, their playoff hopes are no longer on life support. You'd say, like, honestly, on paper, they should be favored to win their final 2. Davis, I think this is in some ways a must win for Davis if they're hoping to skip the first round, because they're not going to beat Montana State at the end. All right. Hey guys, thanks for hanging out. I'm going to call this a night I'll see you next week. Until then, guys, go Vandals. Obviously I didn't have anything queued up. So I'll figure it out someday, guys. Go Vandals.